Hi, welcome everyone to another edition of our Power Baseball League project. So, as you know, we've been working through kind of this idea of a youth baseball team and how are we going to get them more automated and get their data all in one place and prep for future goals going forward. So, one thing that we wanted to talk about today was forms processing and how are we going to take this paper manual application and get that into kind of the 21st century. So we do have another special guest today, and I'll let you introduce yourself. Phil.
Hey, I know that guy. Well, thank you for inviting me into the baseball session. So my name is Phil Topness. I work at Microsoft in the PowerCat team, and PowerCat, we're a small team within Power Platform Engineering, and when someone is deploying Power Apps at enterprise scale, we help accelerate them. We help remove risk from their projects with architectural advisory and adoption and governance consulting, and just really to help them be successful when you're deploying to tens or 100,000 users. I've been doing Power Platform for about 3 years now. I used to work at a system integrator and lead the practice there. We did a lot of work with the federal government, and it was through there that I kind of got into Dynamics and Power Platform after seeing it demoed by someone at Microsoft. And I saw him build something in 10 minutes that had like pictures and interactivity and all this stuff. And I couldn't believe it, right? At first I was like, we already have Dynamics. Why do we need this? And I saw that, I'm like, okay, now I get why this is different. And so, then working with the federal government, right, seeing kind of all of the things that they could automate, like the Department of Defense has 100,000 fillable forms, right? Not like 100,000, but 100,000. And so seeing how we could use things like AI Builder to automate those, because you can rebuild those in Power Apps, but when you have 100,000, it will still take a very long time. And so we need to use those assets that they already have and bring them in through reading PDF forms or even recognize the forms. And that's one of the cool things. We talk about citizen developers for apps, but there's also citizen developers for AI, right? Because AI Builder makes it so easy.
Yeah, that's super cool.
Great overview, and I definitely encourage all of our viewers, if you haven't checked out Phil's YouTube channel, definitely to take some time, because there's so many of those quick, like you said, 10-minute tutorials that you can learn how to build a whole app that does all kinds of cool stuff. So I've learned a lot from that. So Malcolm, why don't you take it away with why we're talking about forms processing?
Well, I was going to jump on that slide that said I love forms processing, because that's really kind of the basis of what got us to this point where we thought maybe we could somehow persuade Phil to participate too, because we're talking about this organization, this association that's got a very manual process for their applications for each season, right? So we've got these kids who are coming into play, and their parents are filling in forms, and the reality of dealing with anything with a huge demographic segment of the population is that you've got people who absolutely have access to technology and could fill in a form and do that kind of stuff. We also have lots of people who don't have that capability or know-how or any of that kind of stuff. So we kind of have to make sure we cover the whole gamut. And we thought, let's start with, I think, Kylie, you said it, forms processing sounds super cool. So let's start there. It sounds like magic. And we wanted to kind of talk through what do we need to think about if we're an association who's about to endeavor down this. Where do we start and what do we need to do? We have our paper application. We've got people filling them in, but we want to get those into the system, because right now we've got Ethel in the back office who's just entering stuff one by one, and it's a slow go for Ethel to get through that process. So how do we help Ethel along?
Seems like I should tell you that Ethel's my aunt, Malcolm.
Yeah, fair enough. I really adore Ethel. I do. But yeah, so I think
good point about accessibility too, right? Because paper is kind of the lowest common denominator, and so this does allow you to collect information broadly and then still digitize it and bring it into your automation, right?
Yeah. So I guess the best place to start is to figure out where to start. And by that, I mean, if we're thinking about this, to somebody who doesn't have a whole lot of experience in this, I'm like, yeah, right. A tool that can take a form and read it and then put the data in the right place. So where does one begin when you want to start tackling a project like this?
Yeah, it's a good question, right? Usually you're inheriting your forms, right? In your case, you've got the lucky benefit that you're creating a form, right? Because form processing is evolving, and I think it's on version 3 now. But there's still some things that it won't recognize, and like my handwriting is a challenge to even human readers, right? It has trouble with my handwriting as well, So there are some aspects of the form it will do better with, and some that won't. So being able to evaluate your forms is definitely where you want to start. Is this well suited for forms processing? And I think we'll do that as we start looking at the form you've built.
Yeah. And we actually, well, and as you're pulling it up, we'll call that out, right? As we went through this process, I mean, we did a little bit of prep of this. One of the things we designed was a form that had some, pick your preferred method of contact and just circle the option. And Phil saw that and said, we may not be able to work with that, right? So to your point, we can evolve. And I mean, probably a whole other video to talk about what do you do in an organization where you've got a form that's been around for a long time, but we can deal with that in a different video. But for now, we were able to kind of tweak that form and say, let's create checkboxes, which introduces a whole other set of question marks and challenges too. But
Kylie's and they're a relatively new capability for the form processing too, the checkboxes.
Well, and these things learn, right? That's the whole premise behind a lot of the machine learning and AI stuff is they learn over time and they come to learn. So I don't know if they learn over time. Did they get to a point where they say, oh, okay, I get it. You're using checkboxes. I'm going to get better at doing that. Is that how it works? Or is it more so learning different things?
You're able to take your models that you published and then retrain them behind the scenes and republish them. And so then that would allow you then to benefit from having more sample data, right? Which is one way machine learning gets better, but also then benefit from the latest model too.
Got it. Cool. All right, Kylie.
All right, let's just try and build it. And Phil, you can talk me through it and make sure we don't do anything crazy.
Definitely.
So I just moved to our environment that we've been working in, and now I can click on forms processing, right?
Yes.
So excited.
What are you going to name it, Kylie?
I want to call it Power Baseball League, but now I'm remembering how many of these projects where I have called everything the same name and then I can't find it. So I'm going to call it a baseball application reader. How does that sound?
I like it.
Me too.
Creativity points.
All right, and then I think our next step is we can add in our documents.
So it needs 5 documents. Now your question is here, are you an overachiever? Are you going to do 5 or are you going to do more than 5, Kylie?
Well, that's a good question. So I have 10, and then Malcolm has his other handwritten 10 that we're going to use. Should we put in all 10 and we do have a variety of handwriting. So 5 of these are in my handwriting and 5 of them I made the hubby fill out. Hubby filled all of his out as like who's on first, what's on second. That's the whole thing.
That's great.
It's crazy. Let's do all 10, right?
You are an overachiever.
And
these are
too well.
These are PDFs, right? These are scans. These aren't actually like fillable PDF forms where the data is typed in. These are
correct. While those are uploading, while they're uploading, why don't we just pull one of them up?
So that's pretty cool that you can dump a whole bunch in, right, at a time. I actually thought you had to do one at a time. So we talk about a lot in this journey that this is all about learning. So I get learning points. Yeah. I get learning points right now.
So I have just finished reading all the Harry Potter books this summer. I had never read them, so that's where this came from. But yeah, so this is kind of what our form looks like. And you see we did handwrite all of them with made up signatures and all of that. And so some of these, like we kind of talked about, these were originally circle your best option, but we said that's not a good idea. So we switched them to check boxes, but we'll see if those get interpreted or not.
So to your point, Phil, when we're as an organization that's got the luxury of creating this, right? When Kylie and I were going through the process of pulling all this together, naturally, as you can see, it's very condensed, right? The lines are close together. Is that a hindrance? Is that a problem? I guess what I'm getting at is what should somebody think about who's maybe building a form that they know they're going to be using for this purpose?
Yeah, what you're going to find is more space is going to help, right? Because I think what we'll find, like on the first 2 lines, where Harry and July overlap, and so as we're training this, it's going to try to identify boxes around the text, and if those overlap, it can get confused.
Yeah, that's fair.
And so a larger form that has a little more room to write is going to be helpful.
Does it matter?
What's that? Go ahead.
Malcolm is bringing that up because I forced him to make this text smaller so that it would fit on one page.
Looks like you were right, Malcolm.
I wasn't really going there, but maybe a little bit.
Oh, we forgot to call out something really important when we introduced Phil. Speaking of being nice or not being nice, Phil is our first non-Canadian guest to come on the show. So
that makes this all the more special. Really.
It does.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, is there something we need to do, like, to be like an honorary Canadian here? Do I need like a glass of milk or something?
Yeah, a shot of maple syrup.
Maple syrup, all right.
Oh, that's a good idea. We should do that. I could ship it out ahead of time.
Yeah.
It's just a normal afternoon practice for me, so I'm fine. Yeah.
They sell it. We can actually buy it in the little maple leaf, so that you could have done that, and then you could put it on that shelf behind you as
that
a
would be awesome.
token.
Yeah. I went ahead and clicked the analyze button.
So when it's analyzing, it's basically looking at the structure of your documents, comparing all those you provide, and trying to identify what changes and what stays the same. Stuff that stays the same is the form. The stuff that changes is the text. And so it's going to try to figure out where the text is. And then it's also smart enough to look next to that, and it will label, like, it'll just says, okay, well, next to Harry Potter, it says child name. So that field is named child's name. And so then when you're working on it with an app or in Power Automate, right, you'll have some nice name fields that match your form that correspond to the data that's pulled out.
So we're looking at this as to your point, putting it into a Power App. So are we going to have the ability, I might be getting ahead of ourselves, to start to map this together and be like, well, this data is going to actually go, we want to take what the form was submitted and put it into that field in our CDS environment?
Yeah, you can. So, there's a forms processing control for Power Apps, and you put that in your Power App, and it'll basically take a picture of the form, and then it'll read that, apply your model, and then give you back fields that have the data in it, right? So then all the magic is done. Now you've got data, and you can put them in a form, right? A form control or individual fields, and submit it to your data source, or really whatever you want to do, right? It's just that one control does all the magic.
Yeah, because we could also then set up that form control to already be connected to CDS. So just submitting that form puts the data right in there. So we don't need to have anything pushing data back in. We don't need to use Power Automate to push the data in. It's all going to be right in that Power App.
Yes.
Yeah. Cool. And I think important to call out too that, and Phil mentioned this a minute ago, but we just uploaded all this in, and it's learning based on what it's seeing. What we didn't do is give it a blank form and say, here's the form, figure this out, and then we're going to introduce the data. We just dumped it all in at once, right? That's really cool. That's new. That's also another learning item for me, because I would have made the assumption, as somebody who hasn't read a lot about forms processing, that we have to give it a blank form so that it can identify structure. But you're saying it's going to do that on the fly, which is,
in fact, you want variation in your forms. I had some sample forms where I had just some dummy data in it, and one field was always filled with the same value. It didn't recognize it as a field because it didn't change between the different samples. And so, yeah, you want that variation between handwriting and content.
Interesting.
Cool. All right. I'm going to close these helpful tips because that's why we have Phil here. All right. So let's see.
You can see it drew boxes on all the fields it found. And if you click on top left, select all fields, right, it will select them all. But as you hover over each one, like you see it did who as child name. Now, there's some things that we would want to do that probably don't want to select all, like it separated June in 2005.
Yeah, so do I have the option, maybe we'll deselect. So,
deselect them all, yeah.
Do I have the option to like extend this or draw that?
You do, you could drag a box around them, and then you could tweak the size of that box. And then you can give it a name, so you can call it date of birth, and then hit the checkbox, and now it'll recognize that chunk of the form. Now, one of the problems we'll have is see how it overlaps with the one below. So it might have trouble recognizing the one below because it's going to see it as an overlap.
But we might be able to draw it and see.
Might be able to grab it, yeah.
And just to reiterate, more space would have helped.
I mean, if someone had come up with the idea of making the form more spaced out, it would have been the right call.
Actually, that jokes aside, that actually does raise a question. So if you had, and I would never be a proponent of this, a 9-page application form, is that too big for this? Is there a limit to how many pages this can be, or can you just dump it? Doesn't matter.
It'll do multiple pages, and what I think is really cool, if you have grids with like multiple rows, like a subtable, it'll pull that out too, and you can access all the rows of the table too.
Wow, that's super cool. So this has done its thing. It's figured out what's static and what's dynamic, so to speak. And then we've gone, it's drawn its guesses, if you will, or it's guess around it. But we're now essentially retraining the model. Is that what we're doing here? Where we're sort of saying, well, you kind of got this right, but it's actually this box here.
Yeah. So you're basically trying to help it identify like where are the fields. It's got some overlaps, like in the middle there. It's kind of weird. And you're seeing it's having trouble with the checkboxes, right?
Right.
And so like the yes, no checkboxes you could usually get, but the ones that have multiple are going to be harder.
Yeah, and we didn't identify some of these fields here, which I'll blame on bad husband data. Didn't fill those ones out, but it might be I didn't tell him.
So talk about artificial intelligence, right? Husband.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool though, because you can see how much it has picked up, and it's captured a lot of it, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah, it is pretty amazing how much it can do.
And I mean, in the context of, as Kylie's going through this, of this whole series, I mean, we're doing this to try and put together this baseball league. We're also doing this to produce the content so that people have access to this and understand it, because this would be really useful. I would hope somebody who's going through and just seeing the capability, and it's really clear to me just how functional and useful this would be if you had a form designed, properly, good spacing, all that kind of stuff, jokes aside. This would be really, really useful and functional and save a ton of time when you get it set up properly and everything's ready to roll and just start feeding them through. That's amazing.
Yeah, and we've seen examples where people will take like invoices, right, which are great because they're machine generated, really easy to read. Invoices that are emailed in, they'll take that and they will process it like this, and then they'll use robotic process automation to basically hand key this into some old system that can't be automated through a connector in Power Automate. And so really they're automating, what was a very manual process, just using tools like we're using here, right?
Wow. So I had asked earlier about what are some of the do's, and I think I interrupted you in your response after you said the first thing. No. But there was some things that are, what should somebody do? So we talked about the space, we talked about the different types of fields, at least a little bit. What are some of the definite don'ts when we're dealing with, again, in the context of an organization who's building a form for this purpose? What are there things that we definitely shouldn't do that we know are going to trip this up and it's going to have a hard time with?
Yeah, I mean, and we've talked about some of them already, right? Tight spacing, checkboxes, things that are natural to us, like circling things, aren't as natural to forms processing. And so, filled in form fields are really, what it's really geared to and is done for a while. And so those are the things to do. Now you see here where Kylie is now, you've got the opportunity now and actually the requirement to train all 10 that you submitted.
You didn't tell me that.
So this can be, a little bit of work trying to train it, right? And like Malcolm was saying, right, you're really doing the hard work of telling it what do you care about and what do you not care about on this form.
But so you go through the whole process, and then after we do these 10, I guess in theory, as we train it, we show it's learning as it goes. And so then we upload another 10, and it's going to take all that stuff you already showed it and apply that to the next batch. And
so then you've got automation on it.
Yeah, super cool.
Oh yeah, so our same.
He doesn't like the overlaps. Yeah.
Doesn't like the overlaps. But it's interesting, and we don't have to do all of this on this call because it seems like we might have some things to fix. But it's really interesting to see like what it's still picking up. And I didn't highlight all the fields on our other forms. But I think even in this case, like maybe this is a form that we couldn't get all of the information, but we might be able to get some of it. And so then we could still save an image of the form and have somebody manually go through and update them if we wanted to.
Yep.
Yeah, you could capture a lot of it. And also too, if you get the scans, I mean, we're talking about using a Power App here, which would be great if you were at like a recruiting event or at a baseball game. You could take pictures of them and get them brought in right away. But also, I mean, Power Automate is a really quick way to dump all these in a SharePoint folder or OneDrive, and it'll churn through all of them and process them as well, right? So you've got both options.
That's cool. And I've seen demos of the like receipt tool. So you take a snap of your receipt and it goes into, it does all that behind the scenes, and it does this kind of stuff. And then automatically itemizes out like this is how much you spend, this is your tax, this is where you
Incredible.
shopped, and
Yeah.
it's pretty cool. Yeah,
And that's an example of a model where someone has already done this step on many, many different receipts so they can understand them, right?
yeah, absolutely. So this is great for those paper forms, and I agree with what you just said, Kylie. That maybe part of this is we capture them, and then we scan them in, and it takes what it can, and then we fix it up, and then but we also have, and I think this is probably future video, but we could fill in a form like a customer voice form that would feed the data in automatically as well, and that might be another route for another video down the line where we talked about that accessibility. We've got people who need a form and they got to go that, but we also have people who do have smartphone or do have time to do it at the computer. I know our registration for our kids has been online for a while, and it's a fairly rudimentary, simple form that you just fill in. And I can only hope and imagine that flows into some system so that they don't have to type it all in. Right? So we could go that route too.
I mean, and using the forms or the customer voice is a good way too, because it works on a mobile device, right? They scale the mobile device. It all goes in the common data service and you can trigger right off it. And then I think you have kind of a middle ground too, right? Like fillable PDF forms are kind of old school. Right. If someone types in a PDF form, not only is it typed, so it's going to really form process easy, and form processing can pick those up. But there are also other connectors that will just extract the data right out of the fillable PDF too. So there's really no recognition that needs to be done. It'll pull it right out.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Cool.
Very cool.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, Phil. I think we covered a lot of information, and I think we have a good place to start once we get our form looking bigger on more pages or something.
Poster-sized forms.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, we have.
Thank you for inviting me to take part in this. I'm honorary Canadian alone. If I would have known that was part of the deal, right, I would have lobbied for an earlier slot.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, I'll have to look into the whole maple syrup thing. So get you a shot or two down there.
Cool. All right. Well, we'll see all of you next time when we, I guess, figure out what we're going to do with this data.
Yeah, and I think maybe we'll explore that other style of form as well. And also, actually, come to think of it real quick, I've got a bunch of paper forms, so we could also then turn this into an actual Power App that we could launch and take a picture of the form, and it would do the same thing. Is that right?
Yep, that's right.
Super cool. So that's another area that I think we definitely want to take into consideration. Like Phil said, if you're at an event of some sort and you're collecting these, and just boom, 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 take pictures of them, and they're already uploaded. By the time I get back to the office, it's already in the system. How cool would that be?
So Malcolm, would you say you now love forms recognition?
I would even use all caps. So
yes,
we're in a good
place. It. I knew Kylie did.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so cool. I mean, we've only been talking for a few minutes and we already processed it and have data moving, and it's great. So cool.
Yeah, I knew it was a thing, and I've seen, like I said, I referred to that demo. I saw the receipt at an event at some point, that receipt example, but it was pretty quick. But this is the first time I've seen it like at that level of granularity. Yeah. What you have to do, you take the form, you fill it out, you load them in. I didn't know you could do a whole bunch at once like that. So pretty cool that you can do that. So yeah, like I said earlier, you can definitely see the appeal of something like this. So cool. Thanks for converting me. All right. Thanks, everybody.